Hey there, I'm Stephen Kesting, and this is the Strenuous Life Podcast. I want you to imagine something because it's a great thought experiment and it'll really help clarify some things. Imagine you're a martial arts teacher and a brand new student comes into you, and you know for sure that 2 weeks from now, this person is going to be having a life and death battle with someone within the constraints of your system. If you teach Muay Thai, he's going to have a Muay Thai battle to the death. If you teach Jiu-Jitsu, he's going to have a Jiu-Jitsu battle to the death. If you teach the Filipino martial arts, this guy with a stick in his hand is going to square off against somebody else with a stick in his hand, and they are going to beat each other possibly until one person dies. You don't know anything else about the other person. You don't know how big they are, how experienced they are, how strong they are. You don't know anything. All you know is that there's this impending date and this impending time when your student will have the ultimate test. And it's not very far away. It's only a couple of weeks. So what are you going to teach them in these 2 weeks? If you're training somebody in boxing, are you going to teach them rope-a-dope strategies if they're brand new? Are you going to teach them bolo punching or how to showboat with their hands behind their back like Prince Nassim? Probably not. You're probably going to focus on the jab, the cross, the hook, and the uppercut, and basic footwork, and basic clinching. And that's probably about it. Maybe a couple other things, but you'll throw out most of the boxing curriculum and really focus on the really basic things. How to make your punch as powerful as possible. How to not get hit in the face. There are probably some defenses against punches that are more specialty things. Those are going by the wayside. Maybe the person you're working with doesn't have the coordination for slipping, doesn't have the timing for slipping. So you're going to work maybe just on parrying and bobbing and weaving and clinching, and maybe that's it. If you're teaching Muay Thai, are you going to be working on 14 and 17 count Thai boxing combinations and all the fancy stuff and the jump spinning kicks that the high level Thai guys sometimes break out, or the cartwheel kicks that you very rarely see in Muay Thai? Of course not. You're probably going to work on the basics, the teep kick, the front push kick that keeps distance. You're going to work on kneeing, probably. Depending on what you see in your student and what kind of aptitude they have, you may work on the basic round kick. You're going to work on the basic clinching, maybe an elbow, maybe a right cross. And that's probably it. You're not going to be working on all the fancy outlying stuff. I think you see where this is going. If you're a Hung Gar Kung Fu teacher, you're not going to be working with your student on memorizing the tiger crane form and getting the finger position of the Hung Gar salute exactly correct. You're just not going to do it. And if you're a Filipino martial art teacher, you're not going to be working on intricate drills in this fancy, intricate espada daga thing. No, you're going to be working on the basic power strikes. You're going to be working at a Largo Mano range where you're trying to pick off the hands. You might be working on 1 or 2 clinch and crashing techniques. You're going to be working on basic footwork. It's really going to focus your training. So, why am I going on and on about this? It's because this thought exercise really helps focus your mind about what is high percentage in your system. And I'm going to argue when somebody new comes to you, you should work on this first. You should give them the low-hanging fruit. You should give them the most important stuff because it'll give them quick results, and it might actually save their ass if they then, God forbid, have to use it. It'll also hook students because they'll all of a sudden feel like they have some basic confidence, because typically the high percentage stuff is the stuff that's simplest. It's the basics of the art. Now, I think in traditional martial arts anyway, there was this mentality of you don't actually show the high percentage stuff until that student has proven their loyalty. You don't want them to come to you, train with you for a little while, get the basics of your art, and then go away. No, that's why they were doing, at least mythologically, stuff like, oh, you want to train with me, young grasshopper? All right, this is a horse stance. Now stand in the horse stance for a year. That's all your training. Every day when you come to train, horse stance. And then after a year, maybe I'll think about showing you some stuff. That was very similar to my experience with traditional Kung Fu back in the day. We did basic forms over and over and over and over and hardly ever touched on any aspect of application, and certainly the training methods for developing the ability to apply the moves that you're training were almost non-existent. And it was really a carefully guarded secret. But I'm going to argue you should teach it first. And what we're really talking about here is the 80-20 principle, or the Pareto principle, which, succinctly put, says that 80% of effects come from 20% of causes. 80% of your results come roughly from 20% of your efforts. This originally came from Pareto, who found that 80% of the land in Italy was owned by 20% of the population, and that 80% of the pea production in his garden came from 20% of his pea plants. But it's true everywhere. It's true in real estate. 20% of real estate agents generate 80% of sales, meaning that there are a few quite rich real estate agents, and there are a whole lot of wannabes and also-rans and people who are just barely muddling along selling a house a year, and then a small percentage of real estate agents are selling a house a week. It's true in business. Tim Ferriss is a really big exponent of this in his 4-Hour Workweek book and in subsequent books. He talks a lot about the Pareto principle. Incidentally, Tim does Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So, Tim, call me. I think I can probably squeeze you into the very busy podcast schedule that we run here at Grapple Arts headquarters. I'd love to have you on. But in business, there is a certain small percentage of core activities that generate most of your income. And if you can identify what those core activities are, then you know what to focus on. And you're not going to go chasing rabbits down some rabbit hole that don't actually help your company or your business and ultimately your family survive. Point is, in martial arts, in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, in Muay Thai, a few techniques give you the lion's share of results. It doesn't mean you shouldn't study the other stuff, because there may be applications of it, and it may be useful, and it may help develop attributes, and it may give you those surprise techniques. But you should do the high percentage stuff first. Cream off the high results, the high percentage, the stuff that you can put to work right away and get pretty good at your martial art, and then to get amazing at your martial art, yes, then you're going to have to explore all the little nooks and crannies, all the little obscure corners, and have at least a basic understanding of those weird areas. But initially, you want to start with a high percentage stuff. So let's take a look at Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, since a lot of the listeners to this podcast practice BJJ. A high percentage technique is the armbar from guard, the rear naked choke from rear mount, the leg drag against De La Riva guard. It's undeniable that these techniques have worked over and over and over. So you should probably focus on these things early in your training. Now, some of the techniques, say the triangle choke from the guard, triangle choke from spider guard, triangle choke from closed guard, they're also high percentage techniques, but they do take a little bit more work, because something like the triangle choke typically, for most people, takes a little bit longer to learn because you have to have a few more adjustments. So in our hypothetical example that we started out this podcast with, I wouldn't actually teach the triangle choke to most people if I had a 2-week deadline for this hypothetical death match, just because to learn the smaller adjustments, the smaller manipulations, that's a lot of work. Something like the armbar, the rear naked choke can be taught faster. But even more important is recognizing that you can go down blind alleys with this approach. Most of the time, this idea of what are the high percentage techniques, what would you actually teach somebody brand new who had to fight for their life in just a short while, most of the time that'll point you in the direction of the high percentage techniques. But there are some techniques out there that work much better against white belts than they do against higher level belts. It's the same in self-defense. Anything works on a drunk. So there are people out there who are like, I know from personal experience that this wrist lock will work on, because I've used it at the door. I've used it many, many times while bouncing on the door. Well, they were dealing with drunks. They might have been bigger. You can find anomalies, stuff that will work on completely inexperienced people and will not work on bigger people. In jiu-jitsu, an example of that is the Americana. The Americana is a V arm lock, the figure 4 arm lock where the arm points up, is an effective technique at white belt level. You will catch white belts in it. White belts will catch each other in it. Blue belts will catch white belts in it. But typically, at least until the next Americana specialist comes out who figures out how to apply this against everybody, inevitably that person will come along. But for the most part, as you go up in experience, as you go up in ranks, the traditional Americana stops working unless there's a really big weight difference, unless there's at least a 20, maybe even 25 or 30 pound weight difference and a big commensurate strength difference. Unless you have that, the Americana, you don't see it very often at high level competition. So it is possible for you to get fooled here. If you're just rolling around in jiu-jitsu class and you're tapping everybody with the Americana and you're like, this technique is the bomb, I'm going to base my whole game around it, and then it'll stop working for you as you start going up in rank. But for the most part, the high percentage techniques, they'll stay high percentage for a very long time. So take a look at your training. If something works all the time and you see it in competition after competition and you see the higher level people at your club using it, then it's probably something that's worth focusing on. Is it the first thing you should focus on? Well, it depends on your coordination level. It depends how complex the technique is, but it's definitely part of that 20% core, that 20% of techniques that give 80% of results, 80% of the tap outs, 80% of the points being scored, 80% of the takedowns, 80% of the guard sweeps. There are some techniques that are just higher percentage than others. And if you're a teacher, you should also take a look at it. You should also give your students the most effective stuff right off the bat. I was once in a class where the teacher was teaching a reverse clock choke against turtle. And there were brand new people in that class. And they're learning a reverse clock choke against turtle. They don't even know what the regular clock choke is. They don't even know about turtle and why anybody would be in turtle. It was like the worst possible way to retain those students. And I don't think that they ended up signing up because they're like, I don't understand why anybody would be on their knees. I don't know what I'm doing here. I couldn't get it to work. And what's a clock choke anyway? Why is it called a clock choke? And I hate jiu-jitsu. So the reverse clock choke is not something to show somebody on their first class. Taking the back, putting the hooks in, sinking the rear naked choke. Now that would be a great thing to teach on the first class. Escaping from mount. Getting back to your feet when you're on the ground and using the technical stand-up to get back up to your feet. Those are great. The armbar from guard. Those are easily comprehensible, yet high-level, applicable techniques. They can learn on day 1, and they can still be using it on day 10,000. Brandon Mullins did a volume with me called The Advanced Application of Fundamental Movements. And he's showing the basic stand-up, the basic technical stand-up, then he's showing how it can be applied from half guard, then he's showing how it can be applied from X guard, then he's showing how it can be used to escape this position, then if you put it in reverse, you can use it to get into this position. You're still using these fundamental movements years and years after you've got your black belt. So, to go back to being a teacher, a great rule of thumb as to what to teach first is what would you teach someone if they had this hypothetical death match against an unknown opponent in a couple of weeks. If you're not teaching them that, then you're not going to give them the confidence, you're not going to ground their training in reality, and you're not going to help them maybe prevent their butts from getting kicked or maybe even losing their lives should they get in an altercation early in their training. Now, none of this is to discourage people from trying crazy stuff out. If playing with some low percentage but super exciting technique makes you happy, go for it. If you really like being able to lord over your opponent, that you caught them with a Nikio wrist lock when they're fully mounted on you, which is one of the great joys of my life, go for it. I'm not going to discourage you from that. But don't spend all your time working on it. Spend 80% of your time working on the 20% of the techniques that give you 80% of your results. Then, in that little bit of extra time, when you're getting bored of working the same stuff again and again, then go for the crazy stuff. Then do the things that you, in your heart, know are probably going to be low percentage. Play with them, and who knows, maybe you'll discover the next big high percentage fundamental movement in jiu-jitsu. Probably not. But you know what, it's fun to dream, and it's fun to explore. It's kind of the opposite of the Pareto principle. You're exploring the 80% of techniques that only give 20% of the results. I hope this gives you a lens with which to look at your training and to figure out what you should be focusing on first, what you should be spending the majority of your time doing. I found it really useful to take a look at my business and figure out what the high leverage points are and trying to focus on those. Of course, then in real life, I end up trying to still do everything, but it keeps me focused on what the most important things are. So I'll spend most of my time doing the high leverage activities and a little bit of time doing the other things. For fitness, I use the same principle. What are the big high leverage exercises? What are the big high leverage things? What are the 20% of exercises that give you 80% of the results? It's things like the squat, the deadlift, the bench press, the pull-up, the big multi-joint movements that strain your whole body. And, as I've argued many, many times before, doing some form of cardio or aerobic work. That's the most effective, the most efficient use of time. If you become a professional bodybuilder, then of course you need to work your biceps 18 different ways, with preacher curls with dumbbells, preacher curls with barbells, preacher curls with the easy curl bar, standing bicep curls, hands out to the side bicep curls, cable bicep curls. Sure, if you're a professional bodybuilder, then you got to start exploring every little corner. Just like I said, if you're a jiu-jitsu guy, eventually you've got to start exploring the weird little corners just so that you understand it. But the core of your program should still be based on the 20% of techniques, the 20% of exercises, that gives you 80% of results. Hope this is useful. Talk to you in the next podcast.